Mason Keller was just a quiet, withdrawn teenager until the night he murdered his entire family to free his cartoon lover. Liora Nightshade, from a forgotten anime series. What began as obsession spiraled into ritual, sacrifice, and a chilling descent into delusion, or something far more sinister. In the quiet town of Briar Hollow, nothing much ever happened. Rows of modest homes lined the streets, and neighbors exchanged small talk over trimmed hedges. Among them lived 17-year-old Mason Keller, a boy most people barely noticed. He was pale, wiry, and always hunched over a phone or tablet. He rarely made eye contact and never joined any school clubs or attended social events. Teachers called him bright but disengaged. Classmates called him weird behind his back. His isolation wasn't new, but it had deepened over the past year. Mason wasn't just a quiet teen. He was obsessed with a forgotten anime called Midnight Souls, a short-lived gothic series that aired briefly online, before being removed from streaming platforms. The show featured haunting music, unsettling imagery, and a mysterious lead character named Liora Nightshade, dark sorceress with violet eyes, silver hair, and a voice that lingered like smoke. To most, she was just another edgy cartoon character. To Mason, she was everything. He watched the show on repeat, memorizing every line, every animation frame, started collecting rare merchandise, hand-painted fan art, and imported soundtracks. He built a private server to archive the series, convinced the creators had hidden messages inside. Over time, he became convinced that Liora wasn't a fictional creation, but a real entity, one who was trapped behind the screen. He believed she was reaching out to him, trying to connect. He claimed to hear her voice late at night, whispering through the static of his television. At first, he thought it was just dreams. Then he started seeing her reflection in dark windows, or catching glimpses of her face on unplugged monitors. His family, his father Glenn, mother Rachel, and little sister Emily, had no idea how far it had gone. They thought Mason's obsession was just a phase. They chalked it up to normal teenage detachment, a harmless escape. They didn't realize how much he resented them for pulling him back to reality. He hated their questions, their suggestions to get outside more, or try making friends. In his eyes, they were the ones keeping him from her. They were the reason he couldn't cross over. Every time they interrupted his rituals or turned off his screens, he felt rage building. He didn't understand the connection. He didn't believe in her. As his belief in Liora deepened, Mason began journaling obsessively. Dozens of notebooks filled with sketches, theories, and instructions he claimed were sent from her. He began referring to Liora as his only light. He wrote that she was imprisoned behind the veil of animation, and only a true believer could bring her through. He became convinced that he was chosen for this task. He stopped going to school altogether and barely left his room. His diet shrank to canned food and energy drinks. He blocked out the real world completely. Behind locked doors, Mason wasn't just worshiping a character. He was preparing for something. Something he believed would free them both. Something no one could stop. Mason's world had narrowed to a single purpose. He was no longer just a fan of Midnight Souls. He believed he was part of it. He called his bedroom the threshold, a sacred space where the boundary between fiction and reality thinned. What had begun as passive watching became active devotion. Mason scoured the internet for occult symbols, ancient languages, and forgotten rituals. He found obscure forums where users discussed concepts like astral projection, digital summoning, and spirit channeling through screens. Most people treated these topics like fantasy. Mason took them as instruction manuals. Late one night, while scrolling through an encrypted website buried deep in the dark web, Mason stumbled across a post titled "Sacrifice Breaks the Veil." It claimed that fictional entities, if truly worshipped, could be brought into reality through blood rituals and emotional devotion. The post described how the energy of belief could serve as a bridge between dimensions. It warned readers not to attempt it. Mason printed it out and framed it on his wall. He interpreted every word as Liora's message to him. The idea of sacrifice real, human sacrifice settled in his mind and never left. Believed that to bring her into the physical world, something had to be taken from his, something meaningful. He began to view his family not as people, but as obstacles. Their voices, once annoying, now sounded like threats. Their concern became interference. In Mason's journal, he started referring to them by numbers instead of names. They were Anchor 1, Anchor 2, and Anchor 3. His reasoning was chillingly simple. If the real world lost its weight, the other world could rise. He moved his shrine to the basement, where he could work in secret. There, surrounded by flickering candles, printed images of Liora, and strange symbols drawn in chalk, he began conducting preparations. He practiced binding rituals using dolls made from old clothing. He performed mock ceremonies in total darkness, reciting Latin phrases copied from ancient grimoires. He placed mirrors at strategic points around the room, believing they were dimensional portals through which Liora could look at him. Every day, he spent hours meditating in front of the largest one, hoping to see her face. Mason marked a date on his calendar, March 3rd. It was the night of a full lunar eclipse, a rare celestial event he believed would align energies across both worlds. He called it the unveiling. Until then, he prepared like someone studying for a final exam. He stopped speaking entirely and communicated with his parents using written notes. He said little to his sister, even when she knocked on his door, worried. When asked what he was doing all day, he simply said he was fixing the future. As the eclipse approached, Mason withdrew completely. He covered his bedroom windows with black plastic bags and painted red runes on the walls. He refused to eat meals with the family. His parents tried to schedule a therapist appointment, but he never showed up. He told himself they would never understand, that they were too deeply rooted in the lie of reality. Mason believed he was chosen. And chosen people, he wrote, must sometimes destroy what binds them. The night of March 3rd arrived, cloaked in silence. A heavy fog drifted through Briar Hollow, muffling sound and blurring the moonlight. In the Keller home, everything seemed normal on the surface. Glenn and Rachel Keller had gone to bed early after reminding Mason to take a break from his computer. Emily, only 12, had fallen asleep watching cartoons, her nightlight casting soft shadows across her bedroom walls. No one knew it would be their final night alive. Mason was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the cold basement floor. Around him, the room had been transformed into something unrecognizable. The walls were covered in symbols drawn with charcoal, the floor etched with a large ritual circle containing Latin phrases. He didn't fully understand, but believed had power. Dozens of candles burned at precise points, casting flickering light that danced across the face of Liora, whose printed portrait sat in the center of a makeshift altar. The scent of melted wax mixed with something metallic and foul. Mason's journal lay open beside him, with its final entry written in jagged letters. Tonight she walks free. At 2:13 a.m., the moment of total eclipse began. The moon turned blood red in the sky, a shadow passing over it like a curtain drawn across the stage. Mason believed the veil was thinning. He rose from his place in the circle, calm and focused. He took the ceremonial blade from its resting place on the altar, a curved piece of steel he had ordered from a seller overseas. He had never used it before, but tonight he moved with a chilling certainty. He started with his parents' room. The door creaked as he pushed it open, but no one stirred. Glenn and Rachel lay asleep, unaware of the figure standing at the foot of their bed. What followed took less than 2 minutes. There were no screams. Mason had researched exactly where to strike, and did so without hesitation. The blade moved fast, efficient, silent. Blood soaked the sheets and the carpet beneath their bed. He stood over them for a moment, as if waiting for something, a sound, a change in the air. Nothing came. He moved next to Emily's room. The door had been left ajar. Her nightlight still glowed with the shape of a cartoon unicorn. Mason paused in the doorway, perhaps for only a second before stepping inside. What happened in that room was never written down. Investigators could only piece it together from the blood patterns and broken items scattered across the floor. Mason didn't speak about it during questioning, and the police never released the full autopsy report. Once it was done, Mason carried the 3 bodies down to the basement, one at a time. He arranged them in a triangle around the altar, facing outward, as described in one of his ritual texts. He lit new candles and burned sage, believing the smoke would guide Liora's spirit into the circle. He stood in the center, smeared with blood, and waited. When police arrived shortly after 3 a.m., tipped off by a neighbor who heard strange chanting through the walls, they found the basement illuminated in crimson light. Mason didn't move when they entered. He didn't run, simply looked at them, eyes wide, and smiled. Officers later said it was the most unsettling moment of their careers. In his mind, Mason had completed the ritual. Liora was coming, and the real world no longer mattered. The crime scene shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The basement of the Keller home looked like a twisted blend of occultism and fandom, with symbols scrawled across every surface and flickering candles casting long, eerie shadows. In the center, 3 lifeless bodies were arranged with unsettling precision, arms extended, eyes open. Surrounding a crude altar made of broken computer parts and printed images of a silver-haired cartoon character. Mason Keller stood barefoot among them, his clothes soaked in blood, calm and unmoved. When detectives took him into custody, Mason offered no resistance, said nothing during transport. Holding, he remained eerily still, staring at the wall as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. The autopsies confirmed the gruesome nature of the killings. But the real mystery began when investigators entered Mason's room upstairs. It was more than a bedroom, it was a shrine. Every inch of wall space was covered in fan art of Liora Nightshade. Printouts, hand-drawn sketches, even screenshots from the anime were taped and layered like wallpaper. Multiple televisions and monitors were connected to a single hard drive that looped Midnight Souls continuously. Police also found dozens of notebooks, filled cover to cover with Mason's cramped handwriting. He had documented everything: his theories, his rituals, and his belief that Liora had chosen him as her gatekeeper. But the most disturbing evidence came from a collection of VHS tapes stored neatly on a shelf, each labeled in black marker with cryptic titles like Thin Moments, Shadows and Static, and Last Entry. When authorities played the tapes, they found hours of footage recorded by Mason himself. Some were simple diary-style confessions where he stared directly into the camera, speaking softly about her signs and the messages. Others showed him performing rituals, sometimes with candles and chanting, other times just staring into mirrors in complete silence. One tape stood out. Labeled Last Entry, it was dated the night of the murders. In it, Mason sat in front of the shrine, lit only by candlelight. His eyes looked vacant, but his tone was elated. He explained that the sacrifice would unlock the veil, and that Liora would cross over before the blood dries. He then turned the camera toward the altar and spoke directly to the image of her face, promising they would walk the earth together. The final seconds of the tape chilled the investigation team. Mason had fallen asleep in the frame, the candlelight flickering behind him. For a few moments, the footage appeared normal. Then, without warning, the screen crackled. A flicker of static disrupted the image, and for a brief second, no more than 2 frames, a new figure appeared. It was a woman, with silver hair and glowing eyes, walking past the bed. Her appearance matched the character of Liora exactly, but the movement was lifelike, natural, too fluid to be an animation overlay. Technicians analyzed the footage but could not explain it. There was no sign of tampering, no digital enhancement. It wasn't possible, and yet it was there. Some believed it was a trick of the light, a glitch. Others weren't so sure. Psychiatrists later diagnosed Mason with severe delusional disorder. Yet even in custody, he refused to acknowledge the murders, simply repeated one thing: "She's with me now. You just can't see her." After Mason Keller was declared criminally insane, he was transferred to Blackridge Psychiatric Hospital, a high-security facility located miles from the town of Briar Hollow. The media frenzy surrounding the case slowly began to die down, but the questions remained. The court had ruled that Mason could not stand trial due to his mental condition, but the public wasn't satisfied. People wanted answers, not just about the murders, but about why a seemingly average teenager would commit such a calculated and horrifying act in the name of a cartoon character. Inside Blackridge, Mason remained isolated. Staff described him as disturbingly calm, almost detached from his surroundings. He barely spoke, except during his therapy sessions, where he continued to insist that Liora Nightshade was with him. He claimed she had crossed over successfully and was now living invisibly in the hospital room with him. Mason often sat for hours at a time, staring into the corner of the room, smiling faintly as if someone stood just out of sight. He told doctors that they didn't understand because they had seen behind the veil. Strange incidents soon followed. Nurses reported hearing the Midnight Souls theme music playing faintly through the vents despite the fact that Mason had no access to electronic devices. One orderly quit after claiming she saw a silver-haired woman reflected in the observation window, standing behind Mason. Security footage never showed anything unusual, but rumors began to spread throughout the hospital. Mason was eventually moved to a more remote wing, kept under constant observation. Meanwhile, something odd was happening outside the hospital as well. The Midnight Souls anime, long since removed from public streaming services, started to gain sudden popularity online. Old clips resurfaced on obscure forums, and a subreddit dedicated to the series exploded in membership. Fans began dissecting each frame, convinced the show had hidden meanings and messages embedded in the animation. Some even claimed the character of Liora wasn't just fictional, but an echo of something older, something ancient. They believed the show's cancellation was a cover-up. Then came the posts from people claiming they had seen Liora. Some described glimpses of her face in mirrors or on darkened TV screens. Others swore she had spoken to them in dreams, using the same phrases Mason had written in his journals. A few even said they had attempted similar rituals, trying to contact her. Whether these were hoaxes, delusions, or signs of something else was never determined. But the story had taken on a life of its own. When a team of investigators returned to the Keller house months later to finish cataloging evidence, they found the basement untouched, preserved exactly as it was the night of the murders. But one thing had changed. The central image of Liora, on the altar, the one Mason had worshipped, was gone. In its place was a scorched, blank piece of paper, brittle and blackened around the edges. No one could explain how it had burned without affecting the surrounding objects. Today, Mason remains in Blackridge. He still insists that Liora visits him each night, and that the real world is fading. Whether he is a disturbed young man who lost himself in fiction, or someone who stumbled into something darker, remains a haunting question. The case is closed, but the story is still unfolding.